everyone, welcome back to CFI Helper. Today we're going to be covering how to brief an ILS approach, Canadian Student Pilot version. Now, I do have a couple other videos similar to this topic on my channel. I have one on how to brief an IFR departure and how to brief an RNAV approach if that is something that you're interested in. It is not using Jeppesen charts, and that's the whole point of this little series here, because during my flight training, the charts that a lot of us used as students at my flight center are not Jeppesen charts, and it's just the charts that we find on ForeFlight. I couldn't find a lot of information online about these charts, which is why we're going to be covering just a little bit of it today and how you would brief this sort of approach. And finally, just a quick note, a lot of my viewers are not actually subscribed to the channel, which no pressure at all, but if you want to help me out a bit and help me pump out some more videos, subscribing to my channel would be super helpful. So with that, we'll get on with it and learn how to brief an ILS approach. So to start, I'm just going to brief this approach plate here as I normally would. And I know it's a little tough to see when it's zoomed out like that. It was kind of the only way I could fit it on the whole sheet, but don't worry, I've split it up into closer versions of the chart. Like as you can see here, this is the top section, and we'll go over everything closer up. In this example today, before I start the briefing, I just want to let you know, we're going to be coming in right over Saxel. So we're going to be doing the ILS for runway 12 for Hamilton, and this is effective until the 27th of November, 2025. Our safe altitude is going to be 4,900. Our localizer is going to be 1109, so we'll tune in that frequency and verify it using this here. Our approach course on final is 117. Glide path at Zolri is 2220, and landing distance available is 8398, which is more than enough. Our MSA in all quadrants is 3100. We're going to be coming in over Saxel today. We'll make sure we're above 3,000 feet, below 210 knots. Then we'll turn in over Apgom, below 200 knots. Then, moving down here, once the glide slope is at half scale deflection, we'll begin configuring the aircraft, so gear down and flaps down. And we'll follow the localizer and glide slope. Once we're at Zolri, we'll verify that we're at 2220. We'll be approaching at about 90 knots today, so our descent will probably be about 500 feet per minute, with the elevation being 780. Our 1,000 foot call is going to be 1,800 feet. And then our ILS minimums for today are 980. So our 100 feet above minimums call will be at 1080. And once we've reached minimums and the runway is in sight, we'll continue. If runway is not in sight, we'll conduct the mist. And in that case, our missed approach is climb to 3,000, heading 117, expect vectors. Okay, so that was a quick run through of how I would brief this approach. So we're going to go through certain parts of this approach, why I briefed certain things, why I think some things are important and some things aren't. So let's get started with that. So first of all, naming the approach, ILS runway 12, that's important. You want to make sure you're actually doing the correct approach. And then airport, you want to make sure you're doing it for the correct airport. The next thing I mentioned that's not on this part of the zoomed in section is the date until which this approach is effective. You can still kind of see it down here, but we'll get to that a little later. But it's really important to mention that. You want to make sure that your approach plate is up to date. So we have a bunch of frequencies here. I personally think this is just good to keep in mind, but I don't think it's a critical element of this approach, so I wouldn't really brief it. Safe altitude, that is extremely important to mention. If you were within 100 nautical miles of the airport, your minimum altitude would be 4,900 in this case. And this is providing you with vertical clearance for safety. You can find out more about this altitude in the AIM, but you basically just get different vertical clearance dependent on what region you're in. And then this is the localizer, so IAB is just the identifier India Alpha Bravo, and then 1109 is the frequency that we're tuning in. And this is a really critical element, because if you don't tune this in, you're not going to be able to fly the ILS. Once we've tuned this frequency in and we verify it with this Morse code right here, we know that ILS is a precision approach, so we're going to be getting horizontal and vertical guidance. In other words, we are going to be getting localizer and glide path identification, and that is what's helping us fly the ILS. Approach course on final is 117. That's important because once you've turned on to final, you want to verify that that is actually the approach course you're following. And then glide path at Zolri 2220, we want to verify that we're actually at that altitude once we've reached the FAF, okay, since Zolri is the FAF. And then landing distance, this one is dependent on the performance of your aircraft as well on that day, but 8,398 feet of runway was perfectly fine for whatever planes we were flying. This over here is just some information on the lighting system. I don't brief it just because I don't think it's a critical element of the approach. TDZL is just saying touchdown zone lighting. You can find more information about this type of lighting in the cap gen, okay? But AL, if you look in the cap gen, it's just telling you it's category 2 or 3 high intensity lighting, and there's a lot more information about that. P2, also in my opinion, not a critical element for this approach, but it was just telling us our eye to wheel height. So this is the plan view here. I love the plan view. It helps me orient myself a little bit in the plane. MSA is one of the first things I mentioned here. I said it was 3,100 in all quadrants. And that's important because sometimes you may be coming from over here where the MSA is different, and maybe the MSA over here is different as well. So it's really important to, first of all, know which direction you're coming from, and two, make sure that you are not going below the MSA. And the MSA, again, you can find more information about this in the AIM, but it provides you a minimum of 1,000 feet clearance above all obstacles, and it's a radius of at least 25 nautical miles centered on a radio aid, to navigation, or on a waypoint located near the aerodrome. So in our case, it looks like it is centered on the airport, actually, whereas sometimes this symbol here might be a VOR, meaning that the MSA is centered on the VOR. Something that I didn't brief, but that is important for you to know, is that you need radar or RNAV required for this procedure. And basically, this is just telling us that our aircraft is most likely going to be monitored by ATC, probably vectored onto the approach course by ATC. So we want to make sure that if we are conducting this approach, we have radar. There is also a missed approach during comm failure located here. The reason why I didn't brief this is because the chances of us having a comm failure on the missed approach are slim, and we're trying to fit all of the most critical elements into this briefing so that we can actually remember what we're doing. So if you have a comm failure on the missed approach and you have this pulled up, perfect, you can just look straight at it. But I just didn't think it's a critical element of this approach. So in our example, we're coming in over Saxel. This is just telling us we need to be above 3,000 feet. This is telling us to be below 210 knots. This is pointing to APGOM here, so we'd come over APGOM and then turn onto the approach course of 117. And then Zulri here is our FAF. This is more of a close-up of the localizer frequency here, but yeah, this is the most I'm going to cover for the plan view, okay? It's just important to note your altitude restrictions and your speed restrictions. Okay, finally, let's move on to our little profile view here. So one thing I really want to quickly mention, because I did this at the beginning of the briefing, was this effective date, okay? So this is just telling us that the approach plate is effective until the 27th of November, 2025. A new one is going to come out after that. So one thing that we do see here on the profile view that I haven't brought up yet is this distance from DME. Because this approach doesn't say ILS/DME, it just says ILS runway 12. We don't actually need DME for this approach. It's not required. It could be paired with the ILS to give distance information, but if we were just planning to do the ILS, we know our ILS system is working. We know we're going to get localizer and glide slope identification. I wouldn't worry about that too much. So I want to cover these two different altitudes here. This is saying that this is APGOM over here, and I said we would be just above 3,000. Okay, so that's what this is saying. What the 3790 is saying here is that you could be at 3790, let's say it's like right here. This is a 3-degree slope here. When you're at 3790 over APGOM, you would probably capture the glide slope already over here, okay? And then you would follow the glide slope and localizer down like that, okay? However, all I said is we're going to be coming in just above 3,000. And personally, during my approaches, if I came in over Saxel, for example, I usually prepare myself to be just slightly above 3,000. And so what that's going to do is now that let's say we're at 3,100, just above 3,000 here, we actually won't capture the glide slope until a little later. So we would probably capture the glide slope right here, okay? And then we would begin following the localizer and glide path. Disclaimer, please reference your SOPs, but for us, we would start configuring the aircraft at half scale deflection. This would be half scale deflection, okay? Once we've reached half-scale deflection, that is when we would start configuring the aircraft. So putting our gear down, flaps down, making sure we're coming in at the right approach speed, which is why that's super important to mention. It just helps you kind of mentally prepare for what is coming up. Another thing I mentioned is our 1,000 foot stable call, also SOPs for my flight school. Our elevation is 780 feet. Round that to 800, I add 1,000 feet on top of that. I would be making my 1,000 foot stable call, and I like to state at what altitude I'm going to say that, because for me it used to be a habit. I would just forget to say that call. This little chart here, you can see match up your approach speed. So our approach speed is 90 knots, and then you can kind of see approximately what your descent is going to be like. So our descent's probably going to be about 480 feet per minute, or 500. The last thing we're going to go over for this example is our minimums here. So we have 980. Our 100 feet above call, like I said, if we had 100 feet to that, we'd be at 1,080 feet. And then what's different between the this video and the RNAV approach I did is our ILS is using decision height. Okay, so in the last video I may have mentioned that you add a little bit of a buffer to your minimums for the RNAV. But in this case, we can go down to 980. If we see the runway in sight, we'll continue. However, if we don't, we'll go missed, right? And maybe the moment you're at 980, you don't see the runway in sight and you go, yeah, we're going missed. But you might actually dip just below those minimums. Not a lot, but just below. And you can kind of see that actually right over here. This little dashed line here. It just goes right below those minimums. Once we go missed, again, missed approach is a critical element here. So it's important to read, which is why I include this in the briefing. It just tells you missed approach, climb to 3,000, heading 117, expect vectors. Oh, okay, last thing that I didn't mention is this procedure turn not authorized. Well, first of all, it's just telling you that a procedure turn is not authorized. But what this can also mean is that because there's no procedure turn that's going to help you get onto the approach, ATC might actually be helping vector you onto that approach. There are some things in this approach plate that aren't necessarily critical elements of the approach that are necessary to brief. However, they are important to know because it gives you more information about this approach that you'll be conducting. So I hope that was helpful. If there's anything I didn't mention, please let me know. If there's anything you'd like me to expand on or go over, I'd be happy to do that as well. Thanks for watching. If this video was helpful to you and you'd like to see more like these in the future, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.